right. So anything else fun going on?
Fun. I don't know, but I'm starving. I don't know. I was just thinking about food. Um, Fun. I don't know. What are you doing for fun these days?
Nice. We're gonna have a little bit of fun this coming weekend. So we're off for Monday for President's Day.
Oh, wait, we have a
Um,
3-day weekend.
we have a 3-day weekend. Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pick up the kiddo from babysitting on Friday afternoon and head right down the shore. And you want to talk about like small town stuff? You and I always seem to gravitate to this. On
Yeah.
our way to the shore, there's this small little cheesecake restaurant.
Hmm.
And I've been passing it for more than 10 years at this point. I always say I want to go in there and try it. And I just never have. So I'm like, let's do it. Let's stop there and see what it's like.
Nice.
It's in this small little town, one of the back roads on the way. So we're gonna stop there, get a little bite to eat, grab a cup of coffee, take him to a playground for a little bit, run around. We'll stay overnight at my in-laws' place down there, and then get up and just do some stuff the next day, and then come home in the evening. And then Monday we're going to take the kiddo to the zoo for a couple of hours.
Oh,
We have a
nice.
membership for one of the smaller local zoos, so we're going to take them there for a couple of hours if the weather's good, and just go see some stuff, and then bring them home for a nap.
Well, that sounds like a fun weekend. And you're fairly close to the shore, right? Like an hour
Yeah,
or so away.
yeah, we're talking an hour away, so we'll leave here like at 3 o'clock. Get him, and like I mean, we'll be down there. Like we'll probably be at the one place probably by 4:30. It's like we're not gonna be there for forever. We try to get to the playground by 5, and then you know he's like me, where he's in a routine. So if he's not in his pajamas with his cup of milk by 6:30 to start winding down for the evening, he starts to he starts to lose it a bit. So get back to
Yeah.
the house so we can get him in PJs and watch a little bit of TV and then go to bed.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. So
That sounds awesome. Well, I'm thinking about doing some barbacoa beef tacos this weekend, so that will be my
ooh,
fun.
that sounds good.
So I've got a new ceramic Dutch oven that I've just been looking for things to make in, and it is phenomenal. I've been doing bread, which comes out so amazingly crispy. On the crust is just like it's hard to explain how awesome the crust is, but the middle is like soft and warm, and the outside is just crusty and delicious. And I've been doing like slow cooked meats in it as well. So I did a pork shoulder um, a couple weeks ago, and I've done a couple beef roasts where I've kind of done red wine beef, mushrooms, kind of classic, and it's been phenomenal. But I want to do some barbacoa and do some tacos. So
Perfect.
that
That's
is my
awesome.
fun for now. What I learned is we have a long weekend,
Yeah. Nice.
so that's
Um,
that.
so I really don't have a smooth segue into our actual topic this week, but I wanted to continue talking about stuff that we've talked about over, I would say the last 2 months or so, and something that you've really been talking a lot about. So continuing the conversation around the topic of sustainable analytics, but also from the perspective of data hoarders. We've talked about that in the past.
Mm,
The people that um, because the the cost for collecting and storing data has decreased over the years. And I mean, I'm kind of jumping right into one of the causes, but
hmm.
because we see that these days it's easy to wire up a new data collection point. It's in your analytics platform, it's easy to wire up a new custom dimension. It's easy to deploy it. You don't need to go through a major development project to do that. And then from a lot of these vendors, it doesn't matter if you have 10 custom dimensions or 100 custom dimensions, again depending upon if there's a subscription model, what tier you're at. But realistically, if you have 10 to 100, you're potentially paying just the same cost.
Yeah.
Very realistically, you probably are, and you could even have more than that. Many of our clients they're paying the same cost whether they collect 10 dimensions or they collect 250. So there are these barriers that used to exist in the past that aren't there now. So that drives this need to constantly over collect data and just add to it. And then when it comes time to go back, either there's never time to go back and clean it up and deprecate old things and move on, or there's always just this need to no, we need to hold on to it. We may need this one day.
That's right. You hear that a lot.
Yeah, we may need this, so we can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
So your big push this year has been, and I know I am totally rambling and botching this intro. Your big pitch this year has been sustainable analytics, and it's actually started to resonate with some of our existing clients. Let's refresh everybody, like what your perspective is and what exactly is sustainable analytics.
Yeah, so there's a couple of key pillars to it, and you say you botched it, but you led into it quite well. The fact is that we've seen this shift in the landscape of cheap collection, cheap storage, and you mentioned like it's the same cost. Yes, it's the same cost from a collection standpoint, but other costs often go unseen. So what I mean from a sustainable analytics perspective is, do we have the ability to maintain it? That's number one. And it's a life lesson I learned from my grandpa, who would often tell me, don't purchase something unless you're also committing to maintain that something that you're buying. And that's one of the things we don't think a lot about when it comes to data. And to your point, and the argument being on the opposite side, well, we may need this one day. And so we've collected more and more data. We have vendors who have made it easier to collect more and more data. And I don't think they're being negative in that approach. Also, just don't think we've thought about the long-term ramifications of that. And so to your point, we've collected more and more data, but we haven't thought about, well, what is it going to take for us to maintain that data? So that's number one. And the second pillar is kind of this less is more approach that we've kind of been taking with so many different things, is that instinctively we think that, well, more data is more valuable. And while in a laboratory, in a clean setting, that may be absolutely true, in the real world is messy. And oftentimes more data is not more valuable. In fact, I would argue for many, many companies, more data is less valuable, because what more data means is more unknowns, more mistrust of the data, more dirty data that can't be cleaned up or is incredibly expensive to clean up. So we lose trust in the data. So much data that we don't know where to start. And rather than figuring out all of these amazing things, we're not making any decisions. What's my tweet? Should I pull up my tweet here? So I did a collaboration where I talked about this in a publication that went out a couple weeks ago. Sorry, I'm scrolling through my Twitter timeline here to find the tweet, because I don't know if I really said it this well, but this is how it ended up in the article. So I said, many companies feel so burdened with data debt that they give up on gleaning any kind of decision-making power from frameworks that they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for. And that's what we see, right? Is that even the most basic, simple types of decisions that we can drive from the data and the intelligence we're gathering from that data is being left on the table because we're so burdened with debt that we can't even make the most basic decisions. So really, those were the two driving factors, and they really go hand in hand for me as we started thinking about sustainable analytics. Is let's build something that we can commit to sustaining. Let's build something with a smaller footprint, but that smaller footprint driving a massive amount of value. And, again, those two things go hand in hand, because your one argument that you said is the one we hear the most. And in fact, I threw this out on LinkedIn the other day, and that was one of the things that I heard. It's like, well, our vision is to collect everything because we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know what data we may need in the future. Completely get that. But I also understand and see businesses that have taken that approach. And then when they need that data, what they've found is it's no longer actionable because they couldn't maintain the collection of that data. And so, while to your point, it didn't cost them another dime to collect the data, it cost them a lot of money to maintain that data to the point that they didn't. Now the data is not actionable. So even though they collected it, it's no longer meaningful. So it kind of counters their argument.
Why? So like the question I was thinking of, and you actually framed it up perfectly for me, is why do people either not see or not recognize the the maintenance debt that they're building up, the technical debt that they're building up, as they're adding more and more?
I think a big part of the problem is most people don't like to do maintenance. I think inherently it's just a thing that most people don't like to do. I can't recognize that because I love doing maintenance. I love changing the oil on my Jeep. I love, maintaining my things that I've purchased. But when it comes to implementation, maintenance is just like this necessary evil that doesn't get done. We all love building new things. We all love getting the new Lego kit and like, let's throw this together. And that's fun and exciting. But after it's built, it's like, kind of throw it in the corner. Unless you're Jen and you're excited about taking the pieces of that new kit and then adding them to your inventory and cataloging them and organizing them. Most people aren't like that, right? Like they get something new, they build it, and then that excitement wears off and it gets thrown in the corner and the pieces get lost and other pieces get thrown in there. And then there's like some weird candies and coin in the box and other things that aren't part of the Lego kit. And then you go to build it one day, you're like, wait a minute, I can't build this because half the pieces are missing. And I got a bunch of other weird stuff that doesn't even belong in here. That's the approach we take with implementation. Is far too many implementers in this space love to open up that new box of Lego and build, but there's no desire to actually maintain it. So I think there's a fundamental problem we have with just the mindset of implementers that their job is to quote implement, and that is build. We need to rewire that and say, no, implement is both build and committing to maintain what you have built. It's like anything else, right? Like you're a new homeowner. As part of being a homeowner, you're making a huge commitment to say, I'm going to put in what it takes to maintain this thing that I purchased, because owning a home is expensive, right? You got to maintain the yard and the house, and what if the roof goes bad, and then the plumbing, but you're committed to maintaining it because you want to keep the value in that investment you made. The same approach needs to be there for analytics, that you got to fix the plumbing when it breaks. When the washer and dryer go out, you got to buy a new washer and dryer. That maintains the value of your home. That maintains the value of your analytics implementation. It's not the new stuff you add to it. It's not the maturity that you add to it. It's the maintenance that really is the insurance policy that maintains the value of your implementation.
It's almost like the conversation we previously had, where we had the question about, how do you convince, senior management of the need to maintain an implementation? And I think one of the things I said was we need to look at the word implementation from two things. There's verb, the verb form of it, which is the act of building, but then the implementation itself being the noun, which is your data collection foundation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the need to, implementers, you hit that correctly, but I think others as well, because people do feel like there is this sense beyond just the implementers that an implementation is one and done.
Yeah.
And then once you set something, you're good. You don't have to go back and continue to maintain it.
I think that's a really important point, because absolutely, you can have the right implementer with the right mindset that implementation is of both the build and the maintenance of what we've built. But if we don't have buy-in for the rest of the organization, that makes it a very challenging job to have, because you're right. I mean, from an executive standpoint, from a business stakeholder standpoint, it's hard to say, well, we need more resources and we need more time. And they'll say, for what? Well, we have to do maintenance. we have to shovel the snow, we have to, weed the garden. They're like, no, we don't have time for that because this agency needs a new tag deployed, and we have a site rebuild going on over here, and this other marketing firm that we just signed up with wants to do an integration, and we need to do that. And so, there's always someone screaming for adding an addition onto the house, but very few people in an organization are screaming for let's do maintenance on the house. So again, you're right. It's not just a fundamental mind shift that needs to happen with the implementer. It needs to go all the way up through the organization, because if that's not supported all the way up, it's easy to get overrun, and your maintenance becomes deprioritized because we have all these other people screaming for new additions to be built to the implementation that tend to get our attention.
Mm-hmm. As far as data hoarders go, we mentioned the monetary cost of having it decreasing rapidly over the last 2 decades. The ability to collect, store, deploy new data collection methods as one of the things driving like this concept of data hoarding. What else do you think could be driving that?
What else could be driving data hoarding?
Like people to be data hoarders. Like, I just need to collect everything.
I think the other thing that is driving it is whether it's by design or whether it's just an offshoot. It's a lack of comfort with the activation of that data, and by that I mean that being a really, really good implementer is hard. Because it's a lot less about JavaScript and building rules and tag managers and designing data layers and figuring out, how to deal with all these browser concerns. That stuff is hard, no doubt. But what's harder is investing time in truly understanding what your consumers need of the data. Because you have to remember that as an implementer, you have customers too. And your customers are your analysts, your agency partners, your executive teams. And it takes a considerable amount of work and investment to understand their needs. You have to think like a product manager, and you have to really understand what are these people going to be using the data for, and how are the decisions I'm making going to impact their ability to do their jobs. We see that very rarely from implementers. And I think what that has turned into is this, we'll just capture everything. And not to say it's the easy way out, but it's the easy way out, right? If I just say I've captured everything, then I don't have to do that hard job of trying to figure out what exactly you need and why. You've got it there. You go figure out what to do with the data, and it's off my shoulders. And I think that's unfortunate, because I think companies that we've worked with that are getting the maximum investment out of their MarTech investments have a very tight cohesion between their implementers and their consumers. And it's a kind of a symbiotic relationship where they're both supporting each other, and it's a two-way flow of information. Those companies are really maximizing their use of their investment in these very expensive marketing solutions. You're on mute.
Yep, that would help. Have you ever walked into an engagement? And one of the reasons why I'm thinking of this topic today is the other night I was flipping around the TV, and as I was going through, an episode of Hoarders came up. And
those shows stress me
those
out.
are like extreme cases. But like, you
Yeah.
walk right into the house, and it stresses my wife out too. She's like, turn it off. Like, as I come across it, I'll watch a couple minutes and keep moving. And I mean, those are extreme cases of people like who need serious help, and it's incredibly obvious right out of the gate that there's a problem. Have you ever walked into an engagement and had the same kind of reaction? Like, it is obvious they have a problem. 90% of the data here is useless.
Unfortunately, all too often. And I think the parallel with the show Hoarders, what is that on A&E?
I think it's A&E, yeah.
It's fascinating, but it's also like so stressful.
It's sad. Like it's really, really sad.
It is. And one of the sad things about it is it's a psychological condition, and there's something underlying it that needs to be addressed. And the sad thing is that, and the parallel to draw with, hoarding data is that the hoarder often doesn't recognize that there's a problem, and that's why on hoarders, it's a family member or others that are kind of staging an intervention, right? It's typically not the hoarder that's reaching out to the expert saying, I need help, I need psychological help, I need help actually cleaning up my home. It's a family member, right? It's a spouse, it's a mom, it's a brother, and that's a lot. There's a very strong parallel to the data world, in that oftentimes people don't see it as a problem, and not only they don't see it as a problem, they're proud of their hoarding. Look at all this data we have.
Mhm.
I can't see my kitchen table. I haven't done dishes in 3 years because the sink is piled full of stuff that's not dishes. But look at all this stuff I've amassed, right? Like, they're proud of it. And I think that absolutely needs to be addressed and recognized that there is a problem here. And it's not necessarily the amount of stuff, but it's the approach that you've taken. It's disorganized, it's dirty, it's a health hazard, it's dangerous. And that discussion needs to be had. And sometimes that's really, really difficult, especially if they've convinced themselves that it isn't a problem, especially if they've convinced themselves that they're not wrong. Just think, if you've ever watched many of those episodes of Hoarders, it's a fight. It's like almost
Mhm.
getting someone into drug treatment. Like, I don't have a problem. What are you talking about? I don't need them. Everything's fine.
Mhm.
And you need to help articulate at a way that they can understand. It's like, this isn't fine. This is actually dangerous. I was sitting in a meeting with the CMO that was quoting numbers from your implementation that are blatantly wrong to shareholders. Doesn't that concern you? It concerns me. So it's dangerous, right? Like, not only is this unsanitary and unsightly, and it just isn't comfortable to live in, this truly can be dangerous. And we have a responsibility as implementers to make sure that the data that our consumers are using um, is as clean as it can be, is telling the right story. And oftentimes, again, thinking of this bifurcation between implementation and how the data is being used is a huge problem. We have to realize we're not just playing like a game. We're not just building something to build and say, oh, that was fun, I populated a variable. These companies are investing millions of dollars fully loaded to make these things work, and the data is being actually used, right? Like, that's the idea, that we're not just, again, collecting this to say, oh, we have an implementation. No, we're using it. We're talking to shareholders. We're talking to CEOs. We're talking to investors. We're talking to the market. We're making decisions on what products to buy. Like, this is serious. We have to take this serious. And I think all too often, because there's been that historical disconnect between doing an implementation and why we're even doing this, is a huge part of the problem. And there needs to be, again, a fundamental shift in the mind of an implementer, that what they do is much more than pushing a new rule out in a tag manager. It affects
Mhm.
the real world decision making. It affects the cost that the business is incurring. There's a lot you need to be thinking about.
So, do you have kind of like a rule of thumb? Because I've been thinking about this topic, because there's a couple clients I'm really pushing to go through like a serious cycle of spring cleaning, of
Mm-hmm.
maintenance, of really cleaning stuff out and identifying where there is redundancy. Just because, say, over the last year and a half, we've been heads down on some major projects. It's like, let's go back and identify where there's redundancy, where we can consolidate and really pare down stuff that's not being used anymore. Do you have a rule of thumb of like when, how much is too much data?
Yes.
Like,
If
is there kind of something like it's a red flag, like you need to watch out for this?
Yeah. And it's not volume, because some companies can have a massive amount of data and it be perfectly fine. Some companies can
Mm.
have a very little amount of data and it could be too much for them. So, the rule of thumb isn't about the size of the data you're collecting or the number of data points. But again, my measure of it is your ability as an organization to maintain what you're collecting. And for me, there is no bigger indicator of that than documentation. And that 999 times out of 1,000 will tell the story. And, we kicked this off before we started recording. You and I were talking about the use of Notion. And I'm talking about how I've been using it more to organize my life and keep track of things in my house. And so if I came to you, Jim, and said, okay, I know you purchased, whatever this new purchase was, you purchased an ATV so you can go drive around on the beach in your beach buggy, and it broke down. Do you know where your warranty information is? Do you know where? And you're like, well, I think it's in the junk drawer with like 5,000 other bills and like some note cards and some string and crayons. It's in there somewhere. Let me go dig for it. Right. That's an indicator of like how much time you've put in like organizing the things that you've bought. And that's how I approach it from a data perspective is I will ask companies if a data point broke or I wanted to know why you're collecting X, what would you tell me? Would you say, oh, well, that's easy. If you go to our wiki and look at this, it has a full set of documentation for why we did this, when we made changes, where its current state is. Or if you said, well, like I think some guy 4 years ago made that decision, and I think I had an email about it somewhere. I can look in my inbox, but I can't really remember. To me, that's the deciding factor. You've done more than you're able to maintain. Mm-hmm. Because if we can't slow down enough to properly document why we're doing it, but more importantly, because I think companies do a decent job of documentation during the build process. We all have our solution designs and our variable maps. How many of them are up to date? Probably close to zero.
Mine
right?
are.
Yours are up to date, but most aren't, right? Because
no, you're right.
Yeah. We do it once when we build, because that's the exciting part, and then we forget about it. But just like an implementation, documentation has to be a living thing. And it is a perfect measure of how much you're focusing on maintaining what it is you're building. And if you're not documenting it and you can't point to me to say, go look at this will explain it, you're collecting more data than you have because you're not investing enough time in maintaining and documenting what it is that you do have. And that is, I mean, that's not going to work in all occasions. I'm sure there are some implementations where they have really crappy documentation and it's completely fine. But if you're looking for a rule of thumb, that's it for me. If your documentation is up to date and I can walk in and understand it, then you're collecting enough data. You're not collecting more data than you can maintain, because I can see that you're maintaining it and documenting it well.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And it leads me into a question that we can use to start to wrap up. So we've identified the problem. We've identified causes of it. We've identified things to resolve it. The last piece is how do you convince others to move forward with a resolution? So say you do get someone on board, whether this be as some kind of consultant that is going to a stakeholder, or you are going to your senior management for the time that, to make the argument for the time to invest in doing this. How do you make the argument for the time to do that?
I mean, I think the easiest way is to monetize it, is to quantify it, is to say, well, if we don't maintain it, what is going to be the cost to the business? And I think that is definitely challenging, but it's something I think the work has to be done. And so if we look at things like, technical debt and not being able to do the things that we want to do, whether it's deploying new technologies, deploying updated tracking, having more robust integrations, we've all seen occasions where the debt and the lack of maintenance has precluded us from doing those projects. But very little has been done to actually raise that up and say, and here's why, and tie it to maintenance, right? It often gets just pushed to the corner. We don't do any kind of a due diligence to say why. So we need to pull up those scenarios and say, CMO, remember when you wanted to do X and we couldn't? Well, this is why. And had we invested 25% of our time in maintaining our implementation, it would have been so much easier for us to do that project for you. But we couldn't. The project fell through. It needs to be something tied with the executives. So whether it's specific projects they want to do, whether it's specific maturity points they want to get to, whether it's data that they can use and trust, we need to tie their usage of that platform with the ability to maintain that platform. And if we can put some monetary figures on it, which I think is challenging, but if we could, I think that would be very compelling. Because we often complain about technical debt. We complain about data hoarding and it hampering our ability to do work. We complain about having to like do maintenance, but having to maintain a broken implementation. But we don't quantify it. We don't put it in numbers and say, last year we spent over 50% of our time fixing things that were broken because we didn't properly maintain them. Half of our time. That means we couldn't do A, we couldn't do B, we couldn't do C. We had excess in employee costs because of that. So to me, I think that that's what really needs to happen is it needs to be quantified. It needs to be tied to outcomes and the lack of ability to drive outcomes. And it needs to have a pain, right? Because if it's just a frustration from an ownership standpoint and there's no pain, then it's never going to change, right? But if the CEO feels pain, if the CMO feels pain, something is going to change. And so the pain is there. Our job is just to help them recognize it and say, that pain that you're feeling, it's because we're not maintaining our implementation. We can make that go away, but here's the plan that we have to put out and prioritize in order to make that happen. Hope that makes sense.
No, it's perfect. And I think it's a good way. Like, what do I want to say? I like the fact that sometimes you just need them to feel the pain. Like they need that.
And again, they're already feeling it. They just don't know where it's coming from. It's our job to help them understand, like, this is why you're in pain. And we can fix it, but maintenance needs to be a priority for us. So sorry.
No, it's good. I'm trying to think of, is there anything else? Like today was kind of like one of those quicker episodes.
I think it's a good runtime.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think that's it. I think from a listener standpoint, it doesn't matter if you're an implementer or not. I think there's some very valuable things you can take away from this conversation. And that is, number one, if we're collecting something, we have to commit to maintaining it. Number two, this is not just the role of the implementer. This needs to be implementer analyst working hand in hand to make this happen. And number three, we need buy-in from the organization. And the only way to get buy-in from the organization is to be transparent with them on why this is important. Quantify the impact, quantify the pain that they're feeling now that is coming from a very specific thing that we can address. But in order for that to work, we needed their help, and that some of our time needs to be carved off. And we need to look at it as a buy decision, because again, I think you framed it really great to kick off the conversation, that we can collect another dimension or another metric. And from a collection, from a storage standpoint, it doesn't cost us another dime. But what we need to change our mindset and say, that's not the full story. Every new thing we collect adds costs. It adds cost to our engineering team to maintain code. It adds cost to our implementation team to make sure it stays up to date. It adds cost to our analyst team to wade through more data. I think that's probably the most important discussion that I would love people to take away and take back into their own organizations and say, how much does it truly cost us to add more data? How much harder does it make our analyst job? How much harder does it make our engineering team's job to maintain the implementation of the data layer? How much harder does it make our implementer's job to make sure that data stays up to date with every new site release? It's a conversation we rarely hear happen, and I would love to see happen more and more in companies.
That's perfect. Yeah, so I think that is actually a really good spot to wrap up.
Awesome. Good conversation.
Yeah, no, this is fun, and this is definitely something I think I don't want to have the same conversation over and over again, but it's a good topic to revisit, and we should reach out to a few other folks to get their opinions on as well. Try to get some other people on to get their perspectives, because I think it's just going to be something that is going to continue to happen. And I think it just leads to what we've talked about before with, as people change jobs, change positions, they come in and tear down, rebuild. And I think this is all part of that vicious cycle as well.
Agreed.
Cool, man.
Right.
Well, this has been fun. So we'll go ahead and wrap up from now and catch everybody later.
See ya.